Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air. I'm Shahla Farzan. Today we go behind the headlines with St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter Jacob Barker. His reporting uncovered much of the corruption for which former St. Louis County Executive Steve Stenger was indicted on Monday. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I want to start at the beginning here because your investigation into Stenger's potential sweetheart deals with donors actually dates back to 2017. So tell us a little bit about your reporting process during that initial investigation. Like what raised a red flag for you?
Well, a lot of it is just beat reporting. I'm technically a business reporter at the Post-Dispatch, and I cover the economic development organizations of the region. So in St. Louis, the St. Louis Development Corporation and St. Louis County are, and they're supposed to represent the region, the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, which staffs a lot of the St. Louis County organizations like the St. Louis County Port Authority and the St. Louis County Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority, which feature pretty prominently in the indictment. I just went to meetings and started noticing things and deals being made and asking who these people are that are buying it. It really started with this real estate deal in Wellston. These two industrial parks that the county had owned for a long time, spent millions of dollars cleaning up, preparing for redevelopment. They used to be factories, had some pollution, needed some cleanup, and they were sold to these guys. And I looked up who they were and checked whether they had donated, and one of them was John Rollo, and the other was Corey Christinell, and they had in fact donated tens of thousands of dollars to County Executive Steve Stenger. And I got to give a shout out to my colleagues, though. Former Post-Dispatch reporter Steve Giegerich, who covered St. Louis County, he had been hearing some things about stuff going through the Port Authority and kind of funny things happening, and so we talked about maybe delving into what the Port Authority was, because most people didn't really know what the Port Authority did for St. Louis County. They really don't do much with ports or barges on the river. They do a little bit. I think they lease some mooring rights in South County, but mostly they do economic development projects. And the big thing is they get $4 or $5 million a year in rent from the casino in Lime. And in the past, they've used that as kind of a community development block grant sort of program, and they can award it to community organizations. But it's just an incredibly powerful organization that was not being really paid attention to, and just the amount of money that it can dole out. But there were kind of red flags before. I think the initial red flag in the Stenger administration was the Northwest Plaza deal, when the county government moved lots of its offices from I think it was in Maplewood up to Northwest Plaza. And my colleagues reported on that, Steve Giegerich initially, and pointed out that the owners of Northwest Plaza, the Glarners, had donated lots of money to Steve Stenger, and eventually, and Jeremy Kohler, my colleague who covers St. Louis County now, had followed up and found that the Stenger administration's rationale that this was going to save the county money was not really true. They hadn't included all the numbers. They had included things like taxes, and it could potentially be a lot more expensive than their former office space. And over the years, the Glarners who owned it continued donating to Stenger, and I think the total was up to, last time we checked, like $350,000, something like that. So a ton of money changed hands. Yeah. So there were red flags before we started looking into the economic development organizations.
Yeah, so you've been really deep into this, obviously, for a couple years, and I wonder, given your previous reporting, was the indictment this week a surprise?
The indictment was very, very sudden. There had been rumors over the last year or so that maybe a federal investigation was going on related to some of these things. County council members back in the summer of 2018, flat out said in a public meeting that they heard that federal agents were tailing the former CEO of the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership, Shahla Sweeney, who features very prominently in the indictment.
Right.
And so they said that, and it was hard to verify, but that was probably the most public airing of these rumors that had been swirling for a while of a federal investigation.
Yeah, what kinds of challenges or roadblocks did you run into when you were trying to report these stories?
Well, there was a lot of pushback, obviously, from the economic, and my reporting really focused on the economic development partnership. I mean, there was a lot of pushback from their media people, and the director. They emailed my bosses, contacted my bosses, trying to kill the stories. And props to my editors at the Post-Dispatch for having my back. And it was not easy. You would put in sunshine requests. They charged hundreds of dollars for sunshine requests, and it would take months to get documents. They were not helpful in terms of getting interviews. I mean, it really took showing up to the meetings and trying to get people there on the spot to talk. And for a while there, the top staff would not talk to me, and Shahla Sweeney would run into the elevator and not talk to me to answer questions about some of these deals. So
yeah, it's hard to talk about this without addressing the elephant in the room, which is Better Together, right? The group that's advocating for the city-county merger. So initially Stenger was supposed to be kind of the de facto leader of this entire unified St. Louis metropolitan region. But then in late March, Better Together dropped those clauses that involved Stenger, and then they added new language that would require voters to elect that leader. So with that in mind, kind of that history where we are now, do you think that this indictment could affect Better Together?
My colleague David Hunn, who's really been on top of the Better Together coverage, and Tony Messenger, our Metro columnist, have been following it a lot closer than I have. I mean, obviously, when you have to change your petition and the person that you were going to make the mayor until 2025 has been indicted, that may cast a shadow over this. And it's worth noting that a lot of the people behind the Better Together proposal, the political operatives behind it, were also very involved in Steve Stenger's campaign, and were close to Steve Stenger. So whether that ultimately affects the vote coming up next year, I mean, remains to be seen.
Right. Yeah, so you mentioned that you were part of a team. Like, this was a team effort at the Post-Dispatch, to kind of uncover these investigations. And I'm wondering, how did you divide up the work cooperatively? Like, what did that division of labor look like for your team?
Well, my colleague Jeremy Kohler recently, and before him Stephen Deere and Steve Giegerich before him, they really focused. They went to the county council meetings. They dealt with the ins and outs of county departments and some of the contracts that were awarded directly from St. Louis County, and tracked the campaign contributions and the election stuff. I really focused on the economic development side of things, the Port Authority and Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority and the partnership. So that was kind of our main division of labor, but we collaborated quite a bit because the whole time Steve Stenger would say, I have no control, I have no influence over the partnership, I'm not involved. They have their own boards, I'm not doing anything with the partnership. But we always kind of suspected that he had a lot more influence than he was letting on, and the indictment really brought that to light and kind of validated a lot of our reporting, I think.
Yeah, so we're at the beginning of the process here. It's going to be probably a long road. I'm wondering what questions are still kind of left unanswered for you.
Well, if you read the indictment, it really does center on these economic development partnership contracts with John Rollo, the big Stenger donor, and a lobbying contract through the partnership. It really doesn't delve into, I think, like I mentioned, the first big deal that everybody kind of said, hey, what's going on here, was Northwest Plaza, and that is not mentioned at all in the indictment. So, and far more campaign contributions from the owners of that property to Steve Stenger. So, whether there's anything there, who knows? But that was something that was not mentioned, and some of these other contracts from the county.
Okay. Jacob Barker is a reporter with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Thanks so much for being here, and congratulations on your reporting of this project.
Thanks for having me.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.